The anemometer read 60 knots. That was as high as it went. Après-Vu lay vulnerable. The seas were 3 stories high. Ayers knew the boat must point into them or be overcome. He started the engine. He opened the throttle and turned the wheel. A strong prop wash erupted under the stern, and he felt the rudder respond. The big diesel faltered, seemed to recover, and then, with a shudder, jerked to a complete halt. The propeller had caught the trysail lines, wound them around the spinning shaft, and strangled itself. They lay now without steerage way. "You're frightened." "No, but my mouth is dry." "This boat is too big for one man. You knew that." "No, this is why we came." He watched himself like a movie, and what he saw was a lone man, skinny and ragged, in a flooded cockpit far from land. It was true that he felt no particular fear or any emotion at all except a dull impulse to get on with it and see what happened. He had prepared for gales with a Jordan Series drogue. It was 350 feet of line festooned with 165 fabric cones and 50 pounds of chain as a weight on the end. It was to be streamed behind the boat in a storm. The drogue, each of its cones acting as an individual drag, would keep the boat's stern to wind and breaking waves. That was necessary, because even without sail up, Après-Vu could hurtle out of control down the face of a monster wave to trip and be rolled and torn apart. The drogue would prevent that, or so it was said. Ayers had never deployed a drogue before. It would be heavy and awkward for one man to set. The forces upon it were huge, and rehearsal in storm conditions was not practical. The drogue was stored in the dinghy locker in 2 heavy bags. Only one of his arms now obeyed Ayers's commands. But after 2 hours, the maze of cones and lines filled the cockpit, and as he untangled their coils, arriving seas flooded the cockpit to tangle them again. The heavy loops of the bridle he placed over the yacht's stern cleats. He tried to think through what would happen when he deployed this rig. The heavy chain weight would drop first to unspool the drogue and its cones as if pulled by a harpooned whale. If caught in its coils, Ayers would go overboard with it. The drogue would stream aft in the wake behind them. They would then run before the storm, guided and steadied by this long kite tail. The Jordan drogue had saved many a short-handed crew. If launched successfully, nothing else had to be done. You went below, dogged down the hatches, and waited for the gale to blow itself out. But if he screwed up the deployment, the drogue could pull the rudder off. It could pull the whole stern right off the boat. If it pulled Ayers off, he would gasp and flail and then sink 2 miles to the ocean floor below. Right now, he could hardly move. Muscular response was slow, and even the involuntary action of breathing seemed ineffective. Clarity remained, however. It was hard to look into the wind, and when he did, he saw a wave larger than the rest. It stood above them all. It gathered itself, steering toward the target of Après-Vu. To set the drogue, he needed to head downwind, at least for a moment. He could use the bow thruster. It was a separate propeller in the front of the hull, useful in docking. To turn it on took only a finger on a switch. He heard the motor whine, and he saw the bow begin to turn. A sea burst aboard, knocking him down again. He got his finger back on the switch, and the turning continued. There was time to study the mountain of water bearing down from behind. It was a rogue wave, all right. He had read about them. In any field of waves, it was statistically inevitable that one 3 times the height of average would periodically appear. That made this one 6 stories high. It stood like a master of its kind, foam-capped, towering, shouldering aside the lesser brethren in his path. "That one has our name on it, Ayers." "Your name, maybe, not mine." With his hand on the bow thruster control, the boat still sluggishly turning downwind, he had never been more willfully alive. The black dog that had trotted by his side all his life was left behind. The emptiness was gone, and the present world was brimming full. The body that contained him was a ruin, starved, aching, but awaiting command. It would do what it was told. The sight of the world exploding around him, the feel of the gale on his skin, the roar in his ears, the salt in his eyes, was him, its creator, the beginning and the end of everything. He had no safety tether on and stood balanced awkwardly in the snake pit of rope and drogue that filled the cockpit. If the rogue wave washed him away, he would be lost without hope of rescue. He observed it begin to break along its face, 200 yards away, on target. "If I die, so will you, wave. When I end, so does all this." There was no time to wait, so as quickly as he could, Ayers crawled over the lumpy pile to the chain weight at its end. It took all his strength to lift that to the fantail, and as he did, his feet sank deeper in the clinging coils. With useless arms, he embraced the chain against his chest. His legs were numb. He could not hurry, so he didn't. He concentrated on the work and didn't look up until he felt the stern rise like an elevator. The time was now. He pushed the 50 pounds of chain over the transom. As the first links fell, they drew the others behind them, link by link, grinding the elegant taffrail. The rate of deployment accelerated, rattling, until the drogue itself followed, its cones grasping at his legs. The first of the cones did nothing to slow the boat, but as more followed, 10 cones, then 20, they gripped the wake in handfuls, accelerating their departure. The whipping cones were like a rug being pulled out from under him. He dove away to cling to the handhold of the binnacle guard as the hundreds of feet of line now poured into the sea, leaping and twisting in a violent blur as the stern of Aprevu rose suddenly toward the sky. He looked up. Directly above him rose a wall of ocean, its face impossibly steep. Bits of seaweed hung as if nailed there. Its vertical streaks of foam were ladders to the clouds. At its peak, surf was forming. From it, a cloak of white spray blew horizontally like the anvil head of a thunderstorm. The wave was transparent, and within it Ayers could plainly see the long line of the drogue and its cones suspended. The yacht seemed pointed straight down, and it began to fall head first into the valley below. Ayers felt the world tilt, his own bare feet sliding. He watched the top of the mountain collapse and the avalanche begin, his boat running down the slope in flight. When she hit the bottom of the trough, her bow would dig in. She would veer and broach, and there, belly up and helpless, the rogue wave would devour her. But as she fled down the face of the wave, the drogue found purchase. Its long length had penetrated not one wave, but also the wave to come. No single one of its cones could resist, but altogether they formed a mighty drag, an irresistible slowing force. Ayers could see them hanging in the blue precipice and watch the miracle unfold. Après-vous, racing toward disaster down the breaking face, stopped suddenly, like a dog reaching the end of its leash. Her broaching turn snapped straight, and for a moment she hung suspended. The avalanche caught them then. Ayers watched it fall from the sky. It swept the deck 5 feet deep and plucked him from his handholds. He swam, floating in the airy foam, borne somewhere he could not see, and conscious of the instant that the universe disappeared